Hey, all. This is Colin Charles, Life of Logos podcast. And we're talking today. This one's not going to be popular, but I'm going to talk about it because it needs to be talked about. We're talking about intimacy. I'm not talking about sex, baby. I ain't talking about you or me. I'm just talking about these concepts that we see about everybody who gets between these sheets. I totally just came up with that for the record. I'm thinking about sexiness and the role sexiness has played in not only in the world that we're in, but also the the progression of this planet. And I'm a Christian. I am. I believe in Christ. I believe in the teachings of the Word of God, the Bible. And I grew up in a church. I grew up in the church in America. And quite frankly, I think we're doing this whole sexiness thing completely wrong. I don't think, this is me thinking, shoot me for this one. I'm sure some of you are going to be really upset about this and have plenty of comments. I don't think we would have strip clubs if women were permitted to show their sexiness. I don't think people would cheat if their partner, whom they are with, showed them a little physical affection every once in a while. That's a controversial opinion, and people are going to have a lot of issues with that one because we've been taught fundamentally that sex is for marriage and that there is no crossing over that and is sinful. And I'm going to refer back to my rule about biblical teachings. And this is not to negate any biblical teachings. However, in addition to, rather, not however, in addition to that, all biblical teachings are backed in reality, which should not be controversial to say. If something is written in the Bible, there is a reason. If it's written down, there's a reason it's written down. That's not to negate anything that is in the Bible. It is to say that everything that is in the Bible is useful. It's profitable. It's good for teaching. And sometimes we struggle with it. We do. I get it. That's part of it. But I want to talk about this bit about sexuality specifically. I remember going through purity studies as a child, as a young adult, and what I found is that women's purity studies tell women to not have sex before marriage. Men's purity studies tell them to not go watch porn. And we are supposed to build a resistance in the faith by rejecting those things specifically, which is not bad inherently. On the face value of it, it's not a terrible thing. I'd agree. Sex before marriage, it's not a winning bet. But it's not a winning bet just because you shouldn't do it. It's not a winning bet because committing to someone, binding yourself to someone, finding a repetitive source of pleasure without commitment ends up being dangerous in a practical sense. That is a practicality rule. If you're having sex with a bunch of people, then the chances of having something unique and intimate with any one of them becomes significantly more difficult. So promiscuity in any form diminishes the possibility of intimacy. That's just what it is. That's on a practical level. That's apart from the biblical teaching. That's just logic. If you are being intimate with everybody, you're not really being intimate with anybody. Because there's a part of intimacy that has a certain level of protectedness and secrecy to it. That is the thing that on the list of things that I think is not properly communicated by the church. You can't just tell people not to do it and not expect them to go, well, why can't I do it? You've opened a loop and you haven't closed it. I agree with the teaching. I think sex before marriage is not a great idea. Have I done it? Yes. Have I paid for it dramatically over and over and over again to the point where I was like, you know what, maybe not? Also, yes. I had to learn the hard way, as some people do. But that's the sex before marriage part. We'll skip around and we'll come back to that. The other part is pornography. Now, pornography specifically is a false settling of something that is beautiful. Because no one wants to say it out loud, but they should. Sex is beautiful. Sex is a beautiful thing. Having someone you can express yourself fully with, someone you can be vulnerable with, in a place that is without judgment, that is protected, that brings forth life, all of that is beautiful. Porn is a cheap alternative. It is the equivalent of saying, I can go walk the mountains of Montserrat and be in the place and feel the air on my skin, smell the smells, be amongst the people, or I can take a picture of it. Is the picture even close to the real thing? No. That's the same thing between sex and pornography. You're getting a clip. That's not it. You don't get the feeling, you don't get the sounds, you don't get the smells, there's no intimacy that it exists inside of sex. But it is addicting. So it becomes very easy to commit unwillingly to pornography at the cost of finding real intimacy. And that leads me to the last point. This ended up being a relatively quick video. We gotta just stop telling people not to do it. We touched on this a second ago. But you gotta stop telling people just no, just because. You don't, and what I fear has happened, particularly with people who grew up in this purity culture, is that you've either cognitively tied sexuality towards sin or damnation, pregnancy scares, and all of these things, and you've made these cognitive ties to prevent people from doing it, and then when the moment comes to live in that life, you can't because you have this purity baggage to drag around, which is one thing, and it doesn't acknowledge the need that humans have for physical intimacy. Think about that. Again, I think the teaching itself is an incomplete answer, but the question is valid. I don't think sexuality should be something that is weaponized. I don't think it's something that can be run rampant. I don't think you should just be having intercourse with everybody you come across. That's not practical, it's not safe, and it's not smart. However, there is an inherent desire, hardwired into all of us, for physical intimacy. And yes, I do say all with some exceptions, but by and large, people need some form of physical intimacy. And to deny yourself physical intimacy for the sake of righteousness is no different than just aesthetics for the sake of aesthetics. What's the point? Hey, I'm not going to go eat for however many days in honor to the Lord, right? Which is fasting. But even in fasting, you can only fast for so many days before your body turns against you. In the same way, you need physical intimacy of some form. We're hardwired for it. Our brains require oxytocin. This is not something that we simply have a choice in. And then again, the other side of that is not saying that you should just go have sex. And then I'm not saying that either. Again, the question is valid. What guidelines should we put in place in order to protect ourselves sexually, physically, and emotionally? That's valid. I just don't think the answer is strong-arming resistance. If you're strong-arming resistance, then unfortunately you're setting yourself up for failure over and over again. As opposed to, what is it going to take to meet my need for physical intimacy without crossing the line into sexuality? If that makes sense. Do you need to be having sex with someone, or do you need to just be held? Those are two very different things. but they both answer the physical need for physical connection. I don't know that you necessarily need to be having sex with a whole lot of people, but I'm willing to say that you probably need to be held every once in a while. You need to be hugged, to be touched, to be looked at, to be spoken to in person. That's not far-fetched, nor is it sinful to hug somebody. The sin comes afterwards when you're lusting over something that's not yours. I fear that what we have done very well is that we've managed to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And our desire to be so pure, we've then set ourselves up for destruction by buying into something that's not healthy. That is that isolation. If it comes to taking care of yourself, there are alternatives. I remember there was a time when I was involved with someone, well, to a degree that was much greater than I should have. We were not regularly fornicating, but she was around, just around. And just having her around, that was when I never struggled with pornography. Just having her there. Just have someone to hold, someone to talk to, someone to touch. But when she was gone, that's when the pornography comes in. And is it a matter of you have to choose this sin or that sin? I don't think so. I think you can do neither, but you have to do so smartly. And it's by addressing the need that is then being manifested in the behavior. Does that make sense? I don't think anybody just does something just because they want to. I don't think anybody goes around thinking, how can I mess up my life today? Or how can I cause sin? How can I do things worse? It's like the person who steals. You think that person who steals just woke up one day and you're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go rob a grocery store. No, they're probably hungry. The need for food manifested itself in stealing because the system around it left a few viable alternatives. I think that's fair. Now, does that justify stealing? No. But if you make sure that the people are hungry, what are the chances they're going to steal? If you make sure that the people are in a position where they can be affectionate with each other without it being taboo or sinful, what are the chances that they're not going to participate in fornication? And it makes me wonder, this is the part that's coming to me now, would America have such a high rate of child pedophilia and human sex trafficking if it wasn't such a prudish country? Or is there a need for intimate connection that we've set in a context of over-the-top purity that is now left nothing but deviant sexual behaviors for its people? It's just a thought. We lead the world in child sex trafficking. And we're also one of the most prudish countries. I wonder if our desire to be pure at all costs leads to us cutting off reasonable affection has led us to hypersexuality. Just a thought. That doesn't have an answer. But I'll let you think about it. Until then, I'm Colin. This is Life of Logos, and we'll talk to you next time.